Bang ding ding, trademark. He come out 6'7" tall. Bang ding ding, one is star. Bang dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding. It is a perfect day.
Woke up to the sound of the garbage truck again. Upstairs neighbor's toilet's leaking on my head. Cars broke down, I missed the bus, there runs a 10. I had a feeling this was a day to stay in bed. I finally left my pad right under Jumbo's cloud roof. A police officer pulled out his gun and said, I said, sir, you got the wrong guy. I guess it's just a perfect day. It's just a perfect day. Na, 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 na,
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Eggs. This week we have special guest Thais Gibson. Thais is an author, speaker, and co-creator of the Personal Development School. She's extremely passionate about personal growth, the subconscious mind, and connecting with others. With an MA and over 13 different certifications ranging from CBT to hypnosis, she strives to continuously learn and grow. After overcoming her own challenges with addiction in her early years, Thais is profoundly determined to educate people on how they can reprogram painful or limiting programs in their own mind. She is focused on helping people retrain their brain to achieve relationship fulfillment, abundance, and personal freedom in their lives. Here to talk about all that and so much more, join me in welcoming our guest, Thais Gibson. Hi, Thais. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Thank you so much for coming and doing the show. We're really thrilled to have you here.
Yeah.
So maybe to kind of kick things off a little bit, let's talk about who you are, where you're from, a little bit of your background, and why we're talking.
Yeah. So I'm from Toronto, Canada, and I sort of started off my early life as an athlete. I played D1 soccer and got a full scholarship and the whole bit, but sort of secretly in the background that entire time, I was struggling with an opiate addiction. And I did pretty much everything under the sun to try to get rid of that. I actually got addicted to painkillers the first time after a knee surgery when I was just turning 15 years old. And I didn't even really know what addiction was or withdrawals were or anything like that. Like the first time I had a withdrawal experience, I was like, oh, do I have a really bad flu? Like, why do I feel so awful? Am I losing my mind? Like, what's happening? And so from a really early age, when I started understanding what was happening to me, I was like, wow, this is not how I want to live. I can't imagine spending my whole life like this. And I did the AA meetings, the NA meetings, rehab, all that stuff. And I just remember looking at people and seeing them in their, 30s, 40s, being like, oh, I'm on day 100 of sobriety. And like, I'm so happy to be here, but this is just, such a battle. And I remember being like 18 in some of these meetings and being like, there's no friggin' way I'm going to live like this my whole life. Like I can't fight a war with myself every day. And that's what addiction is. It's like torment. It's like this internal war. And thank God I happened to connect with somebody who started teaching me about the subconscious mind as I was really seeking out answers. And I realized this war in myself was the war between my conscious mind and my subconscious mind. One part of me is like, I want to get sober. I want to fix this. I want to get my life back together. I don't want to suffer like this every day. And then this subconscious part of me had different motives. And when I understood how to unpack those things and dig into that and then work through those traumas and stored emotion that was there at a subconscious level, that's when I finally found relief. So that ended about a 6.5 or so year journey of almost daily use. And, with intermittent parts, of course, but that was just so wildly transformational for me. So I just sort of dedicated my life from that point forward into probably being a little bit addicted to like personal growth and learning. But that's when I went back to school and sought out transpersonal psychology and did that program. And then just dove into all these different certifications, hypnosis, subconscious mind, all these different things, and started a practice. Soon after that, my practice filled up so quickly. And I was seeing like 50, 60 people a week, trying to figure out how to accommodate all these numbers of people. And that's when I built an in-person school and then met my business partner. And we talked about, hey, you should put this online because then you can actually scale this business. And we launched last October. We have about 1,500 students. and growing about 20% month over month. And it's been amazing.
Can you break down how a student relationship works with you online? Is it one-on-one? Is it you watch this video in response to this problem? How does it work?
Yeah, so basically we have a couple different things that are happening. We have 30 pre-recorded courses. So they're about 3 hours in length. I record them with a video team. And there's workbooks and modules and all these different things. So it's like an actual online course. And then on top of that, we do 4 live weekly Q&As. So I'll just be there with the students live who are there, who tune in for that webinar, and they can type their questions in the chat and I just answer them live for about an hour and a half. So people get their personal questions answered, and then those are recorded in a course format. So they're like little webinar courses. We pick a topic for each one. And then, and so right now we have about 100 webinars in there and then 30 pre-recorded courses, and people come in, go through that, and we have it set up in a membership model. So people pay $67 a month US to come in there, be a member, and get all that content and all of that in the meantime.
Nice.
That's awesome. Well, so maybe before we, I guess if we're going to try and put this in sort of a timeline fashion, let's go back and talk a little bit about sort of your path into developing this platform and everything like that. A lot of the work you do is in and around the ideas of developing relationships. And I wonder if you could sort of talk about this. I have this idea that sort of self-care is maybe as important as being able to take care of other people when it comes to relationships. And I think it's really important that we spend a little time maybe sort of talking about that fundamental step before we get into, how to develop better relationships with other people. So the metaphor that I always use is this idea that, if you're on an airplane, you're supposed to put the oxygen mask on yourself before you put it on the person sitting next to you. The reason being you're no good to them dead. And so, I think that that's a nice metaphor for how it works in life too, right? I mean, if you're not, taking care of yourself, then you're not capable of taking care of other people. So I wonder if you'd talk about that just sort of as a foundational discussion, and then we can move into, interpersonal relationships.
100%. You know what I would say? I've seen thousands of people at this point, either in one-on-one sessions, group sessions, workshops, and there is a common thread where people, if they are not taking care of themselves and they're overly selfless, those are the people I've seen, at least as a pattern from my end, they get sick. And I think there's a huge important component in anything that you want to do to have proper boundaries, to have proper self-care rituals and routines, and know what fills your cup, because you literally cannot give what you don't have. And I think as a person, I actually went through that transformation and learned that, where I was, taught to a certain degree in childhood, like, self-sacrifice. That's what you're supposed to do. Show up for everybody else. And until I learned how to actually build a relationship to myself and take care of myself and have time cut out, it's my alone time, my self-reflection time, healing just wasn't a possibility.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And, even using your example of sort of opiate addiction, maybe moving from addiction to non-addiction to then be able to, to, I guess, get your mind clear and be capable of finding yourself is sort of one step there. And, but I think even for the average person, like you said, so many of us are busy taking care of each other just sort of naturally. That's how we were sort of built, is that we're busy looking out for the other person instead of looking out for ourselves. And, even there might even be some sort of social construct around that where we feel like it's selfish to take care of ourselves. And so I wonder, would you just sort of talk about sort of the different aspects of a relationship in general? And I think some of these will probably apply to self and other people, but are there sort of some tools or some things that we should be looking at in terms of how to, A, I guess, sort of evaluate the relationship we presently have with ourselves, and then B, how we can sort of, make some motion forward and see if we can actually start healing?
Absolutely. So there's a certain set of steps I take people through inside the school specifically. And the first thing is understanding your needs. We all have subconscious needs, and they start with our 6 basic human needs, which are certainty, novelty, contribution, growth, love and connection, and significance. And these things are things that we're wired for. And then those sort of branch out into our personality needs. And we all have these subconscious needs that we identify with our sense of self. So they're basically strategies to get those 6 basic human needs met. So just an example would be, let's say you have a really high personality need for family. And maybe you consider yourself a family man, and maybe you talk about your family a lot and you identify that as a big part of your sense of self. Well, that's actually a subconscious strategy to get the deeper unconscious need for love and connection met. And you've just built in the most positive versus negative associations to getting your needs met through family. And so that's how we sort of develop our identity. And we all have like a hierarchy of our top 5 or 6 personality needs that really impacts how fulfilled we feel. And literally, this is what fulfillment is. Fulfillment is when our personality needs are met, they're filled. And so when we don't know what those things are, when we're not aware of them, when we're living out of alignment with them, it's actually one of the root causes for how we can experience depression or anxiety, because the subconscious mind elicits emotional reactions and it says, hey, there's a need unmet. And that comes from a survival perspective, right? Like, we're supposed to feel bad when needs are not met. That's how we've adapted and survived and, gone and gotten food and shelter and evolved for so long. But now when we're living in this world where we don't have those basic things we're struggling for, it really can create an emotional problem when we have our personality needs unmet. And one of the really challenging things is, like, most people don't even know what those are. Most people don't realize how that's impacting them. And so much of our productivity is based on that, because when we're living out of alignment with those things, the first thing that happens is we start procrastinating, we start self-sabotaging, we start feeling negative, we start blaming, and then we start creating stories around that in our thought patterns. Like, oh, why is life so hard? Why is this so difficult? And we get into a negative mind frame as a result. So one of the first things is understanding those needs. And one of the second things is learning to set boundaries around those things and creating a vision from that in terms of what's important and meaningful for you. Because so many, like, one of the biggest struggles I see is people will not have a vision for their life because they don't know their needs. So they don't have something that's truly in alignment with them. And then we have no friggin' idea what to say yes and no to. It's like, if I have a vision and I know, look, these are the 3 things I'm going to do today to move towards that vision, and I feel inspired and clear about that, then if, Bob comes and says, hey, can you help me move today? Or, hey, can you, let's get together and drink or whatever, I know, no, that's not really going to fit in with my day and me moving towards that vision and creating further fulfillment. And so we can become really imbalanced and really sort of like leaking all over the place with our yeses and nos when we don't have that vision, when we don't have that clarity, and when we don't know our needs.
So how does someone start unpacking the deeper aspects of it? What is it? You'd go and take a Myers and Briggs personality test and go from there? Or what's the best way to do that?
Good question. Yeah. So Myers-Briggs doesn't tell us our personality needs. It tells us like sort of the flavor of our personality, if anything. What we really want to get into is you can ask yourself a set of questions. And what you'll see is that research tells us very conclusively the conscious mind cannot outwill or overpower the subconscious mind. So we can have all these conscious intentions, but if our subconscious mind has a different itinerary, then it will never reach our goals. This is why you see so many people failing their New Year's resolutions. This is exactly what my experience was with addiction. Like, my conscious mind going sobriety, and my subconscious being like, no, escape the pain from the past, like, numb things out. And so what you can look for when you're trying to understand your subconscious mind is that your subconscious mind is the one governing your behavior. And so you want to look for, what are the things I naturally talk about? What are the things I naturally spend my free time doing? What are the things that I can't stop thinking about, fantasizing about in the future? And you're looking for patterns within these things. What things naturally inspire you or uplift you? What do you naturally read research about? These questions, there's 13 in total. Those are the first 5. I won't go through all of them, but these questions in terms of noticing your behavioral patterns already are letting you know what your subconscious motives are.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think that's really great. And honestly, that's maybe one of the better explanations I've heard of all this personality stuff. So thank you for that. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about, just sort of as an extension of that, sort of the commonly observed problems you're seeing in people. I imagine, among sort of this broad client base, you're seeing so many people at this point, you're starting to understand, where the deeper needs are versus the more superficial things. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure every person is individual and stuff like that. But I wonder if you had any learnings, in regards to what people are dealing with as far as relationships go, and what seem to be the most difficult challenges to overcome.
Great question. So I would say one of the first things is people really struggle with the relationship to themselves. And that pours into everything. And that is, do I know my needs? Do I carve out time for these things? Do I have time for self-reflection? Am I actually connecting to myself and understanding myself? Because we cannot get anywhere near our highest potential until we have a relationship to ourselves. It's just not possible. So that's step 1. And that spills into your interpersonal relationships. If I go into a romantic relationship or a friendship or a relationship with my colleagues and I don't know what I want or expect or need, then the mind does this thing where it instead just expects people to mind read. And there's this huge, I would almost say epidemic in a way, but there's this huge component in human behavioral patterns where people do not communicate their needs to each other. People don't allow themselves to take up space. People don't set boundaries because they don't even know what those things are at the root level in themselves first. And so a huge problem in relationships is people don't feel comfortable saying, hey, you know what? I had a hard day today. I could use some validation. Or, hey, I respond, you go into the workplace, I respond really well to positive reinforcement, not negative. Can you frame things in a positive way? And if we don't know how to communicate those things, then what the mind does instead is it starts telling stories. And it goes, oh, my boss doesn't like me. Nobody understands me. I'm not liked. And we give painful meaning to things. And these are the two parts of how we experience negative emotion. Pain is unmet needs. Suffering is the story we tell around those unmet needs. So if I am feeling disconnected in my romantic relationship, right, I could have a pain of not having the need for love and connection met. But then the brain naturally looks for worst case scenarios because it's survival oriented. And it goes, oh, it's because I'm not lovable, or I'm not good enough, or I'm not smart enough, or funny enough, or interesting enough. And we give it meaning, and now we have suffering. And if we can learn how to be aware of our needs and meet our needs and communicate them, and if we can learn how to question these pieces of meaning and recognize that we're storytelling to ourselves, this is the root of how we uproot any emotional pain or suffering. And if you pay very close attention, needs or painful stories both elicit emotional reactions, and all emotional reactions are made up of neurochemical reactions. So the patterns of unmet needs and the patterns of stories we play out throughout the course of the day have a direct impact on our emotional state all day and our neurochemistry. And so when we can start changing those things at a subconscious level, neurochemistry changes accordingly. And I say that as somebody who was on antidepressants. I struggled with anxiety. I was clinically diagnosed with both. Got in charge with these things at the subconscious level first within myself, and been off antidepressants for 10 plus years. We'll never need to use them again. And so I'm not saying people should just jump off antidepressants, but I'm saying if we can look into ourselves and start to understand these patterns at the subconscious level and clean the crap out of our subconscious mind, we empower ourselves to reach our potential so much more quickly and effectively.
Yeah, I was watching one of your videos earlier today. You were talking about people who have the ability to kind of read body language over people who are kind of more just, they don't get it as well, and how they tend to do exactly what you just said. They self-analyze and overanalyze just oh, he did this, so that means this. And then they start thinking about it and ruminating on it, and it causes more problems and more problems. And it just kind of goes from there. Can you break that down a little bit? How, someone who is attentive to body language and stuff like that can actually cause problems for themselves?
100%. So what I refer to is it's hypervigilance, and it's sometimes an adaptation we make to traumatic events. It happens most often. People become most hypervigilant when there's childhood trauma in the home. And so they learn to not really trust and look for, all the different shifts and patterns that could happen as a survival mechanism that gets programmed into them. And so people use that as an adaptation or strategy. But the problem with it is if you could watch it happening in slow motion, because the brain is designed to reproject its worst case scenarios onto things at the emotional level, we're usually storytelling about our own biggest wounds. So let's just say, for example, let's pretend as a child, somebody felt unloved and not good enough. Okay. And maybe they didn't get their emotional needs met enough from their parents, something like that. The subconscious mind stores everything. Okay. It consolidates memories over time, but it stores all of them with all the emotion attached. And so out of that, we see the world through those lenses. So this person can go into their adult life, and unless they've gone back and isolated and worked to reprogram those specific wounds, you can guarantee that person all of their life is telling the same story over and over again when their partner pulls back, when somebody doesn't call them back in time, when a colleague doesn't give them the reinforcement they wanted. They go, oh, it's because I'm not good enough. I'm not this enough. I'm not that enough. And we tell all of these stories and have all these thoughts coming off of those core beliefs. I like to compare it to like a tree trunk as a core belief. I'm not good enough. And the tree branches are, I'm not smart enough. I'm not attractive enough. I'm not funny enough. I'm not. So we have all these extensions of things. And those things that we tell are based on unresolved traumas that we have stored at a subconscious level within ourselves. And so go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say I've kind of had very similar stuff happen in my life in regards to failure, relationship failure. Religion is involved in it. A lot of stuff comes to the forefront, and I've been able to kind of go back and unpack it just by doing exactly what you're saying, and just kind of realizing this caused this caused that, this caused this, and then analyzing it and kind of figuring that out. For someone who hasn't had that opportunity yet, is it pretty much just go hire a therapist and say, hey, analyze me and tell me what I need to fix? Or is there a better route? Is there an easier route? Are there books they can read? What's the starting point to someone?
It's a great question. So one interesting thing is that, I went through that whole model, did the therapy, did all that stuff. A lot of people in our traditional healthcare system, and there's amazing things that come out of it. Don't get me wrong. There's incredible modalities, but a lot of people are not talking about the subconscious mind. And research has told us very conclusively, we can't even change unless we engage the subconscious mind in the process. So, one of the first things you want to recognize, and one of the easiest ways of finding what your patterns are, is it's very interesting. When people are in painful situations and they're experiencing suffering or frustration, if you look really closely, there are usually repeat patterns happening your whole life around those same topics. You're experiencing them in different forms, but they're often in the same space. So for example, I was speaking to somebody yesterday, and he was saying, I have this wound around feeling really betrayed and abandoned. And he was talking about his current partner and some of the challenges. And then I said, okay, tell me all the times you felt like that. And he's like, oh my gosh, I felt like this with a coach once. I felt like this and he just lists this laundry list of how he's felt those similar feelings, but he wasn't recognizing it's a pattern because it was happening with different people in all these different situations. And the reason for this is that the subconscious mind is very interested in your survival, not your happiness. So when we have these wounds or these pain points, research shows too, 95 to 97% of our day is run by our subconscious mind, 3 to 5% by our conscious mind, the part we identify with our, rationality and reasoning and logical thinking mind. So all in that 95, 97% of your day, your subconscious mind is actually seeking out the past. It's actually seeking out these things because it goes, even if that hurt, we survived. So those things are working. And this is why people often, they come from an abusive household. They go into an abusive relationship. They come from a wound in childhood. They seek out a partner who tends to reinforce that wound, or a boss, or a workplace that has similar values or morals to things that they're familiar with. And so part of what we have to do is recognize what those patterns are in our own lives, understand what meaning we have there. When somebody betrays me or abandons me, what do I make it mean about myself? And then what we have to do is reprogram those core wounds. And there's a whole bunch of different ways to do it, but the major pieces are that the subconscious mind is reprogrammed through repetition plus emotion. So if I have this belief I'm not good enough, and if that's blowing up my whole life and I'm not taking opportunities and I'm not showing up at work and I'm keeping myself small because I believe this about me, then what I need to be doing is on a repetitive daily basis, I need to use my conscious mind to reprogram my subconscious mind and look for pieces of evidence repetitively that have an emotional impact or elicit an emotional response for how I actually am good enough. And if I can do that, what we do is we use our conscious mind to reprogram these wounded subconscious parts.
Yeah, no, that's great. And actually, it sort of leads me into this next topic. I wanted to talk a little bit about limiting beliefs and sort of critical inner voice. And so I think they're kind of connected. Maybe somebody smarter than me can break them into two topics. But I think that, this idea and so much of what we've been discussing, especially as it pertains to I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, that kind of thing, are really limiting beliefs. Maybe some people have maybe a more natural proclivity to something or things like that. So of course that can exist too. But generally speaking, just about anything we want to do, we could accomplish. But so many of us stop before we try for reasons of these limiting beliefs. Mm-hmm. Also, just to sort of add to that, this idea of the critical inner voice, this idea that we're sort of negatively talking to ourselves or we're pushing ourselves down at the same time. We're our, own crabs in the bucket, pulling ourselves backwards all the time. I wondered if you could sort of talk about those things as it pertains to the stuff we've been discussing so far, and maybe how we work through or start to overcome some of those things.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So I always say the first thing that we want to do is isolate a problem. We can't solve anything at the emotional level until we convert those emotions into words. So we have to start recognizing, what are those patterns? How do I talk to myself? And something really interesting that you'll always find is that the places that we are most self-critical are usually the places that we were criticized the most growing up. And so you can think of that critical inner voice as being basically the internalized voice of your parents, or, any caregiver that raised you, or any circumstance, maybe a teacher, somebody you were repetitively exposed to, because it's the repetition that creates that programming. So we can look at, what are the pain points from how my parents spoke to me, people in my early childhood upbringing spoke to me. And the reason we target inner childhood is because we tend to keep seeing things through that filter. So we tend to keep reinforcing these programs over time. Unless something really profound happens almost accidentally, we usually keep most of those programs from our childhood up, but we just experience different versions of them in our adult lives. So what we want to look at is what were the patterns of how mom talked to me that I didn't like, how dad talked to me in a way I didn't like. Another thing too is what unmet needs did I have from childhood? And what you will find is, unless you've done work around these things or something miraculous has happened by chance, you are usually talking to yourself in the same way, criticizing yourself for the same things. And you are also not actively meeting the needs in relationship to yourself. So for example, we'll often see somebody who was emotionally neglected in childhood. They go on to neglect their own emotions like crazy in their adult lives. And again, it's because the subconscious goes, well, we're surviving, so let's keep this comfort zone alive. Familiarity equals safety, and safety equals survival. So there are 22 core beliefs that I found, and I won't go through all 22, but there are things like I am not important, I don't matter, I'm not good enough, I am stupid is a really painful one for people, I am alone, I am abandoned, I am unworthy, I will be betrayed, and the list goes on. But really we want to highlight what these core points are of extreme pain, because I can tell you with so much just seeing over and over and over again, when we wipe these things out, people are like, oh my gosh, I have more energy, I feel better all day, I'm not afraid to take opportunities at work, I'm okay to step outside of my comfort zone. I don't personalize rejection in the same way. I am rejected is a core wound. And when we can shift our perception and reprogram these patterns, suddenly it's my conscious and subconscious work together. And it's you got 95 to 97% of your brain power back all of a sudden.
So Ryan, I actually just want to throw this out there. There's a book that I've been listening to this week called Limitless by Jim Quick. And it's an amazing, it goes over a lot of the stuff as far as when he was a kid, he had an accident and his memory was shot. He had a hard time with learning stuff, and kids would call him the dumb kid and stuff like that. And he was able to kind of reprogram his brain to this is why I want to learn. This is how I'm going to learn. This is what I'm going to do with it. Big part of it was, starting with why, figuring out why you want to do it in the first place. Once you figure out the why, then you know why you're going to get up and go to work in the morning, why you're going to do this, why you're going to do that. And it's an amazing book. So if you want to kind of go into depth on that, it's great. So
that's amazing.
That's awesome. Thanks, Mike.
And one of the craziest things is that our subconscious mind is so easy to reprogram. We can't outwill our subconscious mind. It's literally not possible for prolonged periods, but we can reprogram anything. And just nobody has access to that stuff. It's very, a lot of people aren't talking about it for how empowering it can be. And so I'm glad to hear that Jim Quick's going into stuff like that.
Oh yeah. It's a great book. I found out about him through a memory program that he teaches. And when I saw I had the book coming out, I got it, and it's very good. So I would highly recommend people listening to it. Can you, I kind of want to go down the addiction side of things, because you're coming from personal experience. I've had a lot of experience being addicted to pot and alcohol and all sorts of stuff. I think I just have an addictive personality. Right now, I'm drinking coffee, and I'll drink a beer later to kind of go back the other way. It's and I think I've gotten to a point where I can self-regulate, and I kind of know what I need myself. But I have a lot of friends in the bar scene. I have a lot of friends as a DJ. Everyone I hang out with is at a bar or a nightclub. The drugs run rampant in these areas. How can someone realize they have a problem and start addressing it and fixing it? Because I see a lot of problems in my industry, and it's scary to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say what we can define it under the umbrella of, like, do I have a problem or do I not? Maybe somebody's asking themselves this question. It's really, is there a part of me that keeps wanting to stop this thing, but I feel helpless to myself? And the thing that I'm doing definitely keeps creating negative impacts on my life. And I think as long as we fall under that umbrella, there's some form. It may not be full blown addiction, but it might be something where, this is something I should probably work on. And what I always tell people, and this applies to everything, this doesn't just apply to alcohol or weed or substances. It applies to people who have food addictions, people who have porn addictions, like sex addiction, all these different components. And what I tell people is the issue is not the issue. It's not the bottle of wine. It's not the opiates. It's not, those things are not like, hey, come here, drink me or ingest me. Like that's the symptom. And what's actually happening is there's something within us as people when we have an addiction that's trying to get us to escape. And the reason for that is something at the subconscious level. And what we don't recognize is, we think roughly 60 to 70,000 thoughts a day, according to a study at the USC Neuroimaging Institute. And roughly 50,000 of them, according to the study, are just repetitive thoughts from the day before. And most of those thoughts are made up of your re-traumatizations, is what I call them. Oh, mom and dad told me or made me feel in childhood like I wasn't worthy or I wasn't safe. And so my mind all day is looking for how I'm not worthy, how I'm unsafe, and keeps looking through that perceptual filter because this is our lens that we see the world through. And we have all of these little neurochemical reactions happening with every thought we think because they elicit those emotional responses, which they're made up of those neurochemicals. So if we're not recognizing what those things are and cleaning those things up, then literally we need to do something to regulate. And every single thing your mind does is a subconscious strategy to get a specific need met. So if I feel bad all day because I'm thinking painful thoughts, I'm keeping things, in the state of re-traumatization from childhood, and I don't realize it because I've adapted and I'm comfortable there and it's what I know, then I'm feeling all these negative emotions, negative neurochemical reactions. And then I know to some degree, I don't feel so good. I want something to regulate. And so I regulate outside of me because I don't know how to regulate inside of me. So I go to the painkiller, or I go to the alcohol, or I go to, whatever it is. And it's actually your subconscious mind trying to keep you okay and protected, but it's a symptom of something you're running from underneath. And so when we can identify what those things are and shift those things, what we do is we start plucking the weeds at the root level. We deal with the root cause of addiction. And as a natural byproduct of that, the symptom of it starts to change.
See, my thought was people have this sense of need for community. They need relationships. They need to be in a group. And for me as a kid, it was church. Everything I did was church. I'd go, Sunday was this, Monday was that, Wednesday was this, Saturdays we had church dances, and everything evolved around that. And then when I left that, now it's the bar. My community's the bar. Everyone I hang out with is, bartender this, guy who I see every day here, play pool every day there. That's my community. And now I have to have a drink in my hand when I'm at the bar because they have a drink in their hand. And now I'm an alcoholic, and now I'm this. And now, it's like, how can someone have that sense of community in this digital age with Facebook, and there's no actual interpersonal stuff going on, without the bar, without the, there's so much to unpack there, but that's kind of how I analyzed it and how I figured, okay, why am I going to the bar? I want this community. Why am I doing this? I want that. And I had to unpack it and realize that was the stem of the problem. And I kind of figured it out myself, but I could probably still have a lot of issues. I don't even realize you know what I mean? There's just a lot there, but can you kind of maybe expound on that a little bit?
Yeah. So you did the first part already, which is amazing. You started unpacking and going, okay, what needs am I getting met by having the bar? Even if I know that the bar has a downside to it or drawbacks, I'm trying to get the need met for community. So you've kind of dealt with the need part. It's the very first step of identifying and isolating that problem. And then what you want to do is you want to remember we're always doing the needs and then the beliefs and the thought patterns, the stories. So you start with the needs, you go, okay, what's a healthier way of getting community that's not the bar if there's too many downsides? And then you have to pattern in and get comfortable, updating your strategy to get that need met. So maybe it's, meetup groups. Maybe it's just, having gatherings with friends more often during the day, going to lunch, whatever it is, you can make a list of strategies. That's your first part. And then the second part is, even though it's the norm, why do I have to go and drink at the bar with these people? What shows up for me? What are my beliefs about people or stories about people and interacting with people that make me feel like I need to have something to regulate that, to put into my body, like alcohol, in order to feel safe and comfortable? And so what you want to do is what I call like a story dump. You dump out all of the stories that you have about people. Oh, if I don't drink, I won't be cool enough. Oh, I won't be interesting enough. I'll be excluded from everybody else. I'll feel isolated. And those are all these beliefs you carry about your interactions with people that keep putting you back into, okay, then I need the drink. And they're all happening in a subconscious level. But when you can isolate them and reprogram those things and get those out of the way, now you don't have to feel like I need this to regulate that, because what's actually happening is those little insecurities are happening maybe on your way to the bar in ways you might not even realize consciously at all. And then you get there and you're like, oh, let me get that drink. And
the little insecurities, I actually, Jim Quick was talking about it in his book. When you get your phone and you're in a conversation and all of a sudden, you forget something to say, the reaction is to pull your phone up and look at it away from, like the conversation. It's your escape. It's your out. And the drinks were the same thing. I'd have that glass in my hand and then, conversation's getting weird here. I got to take a drink. I got to pull this up. So if you don't have the glass in your hand, you don't have that. It's like your comfort blanket. It's like your go-to. And for me, what I kind of just did was like, okay, I'm going to have a glass in my hand, but it's going to be water and cranberry juice. So it looks like a cocktail. It looks like I'm participating. It looks like I'm part of this, but I'm not getting messed up. I'm not having problems where I'm waking up on the side of the street at the middle of the night, like the crazy shit that you shouldn't be doing. So
been there, I understand.
Right?
Yeah. No judgment here.
So I just wanted to point that out. Those little triggers are what kind of, you have to kind of really self-analyze and figure out why you're doing what you're doing. And for me, it was the drink was the comfort blanket. And by having the water and the cranberry juice, I was able to kind of get rid of I need to get trashed to do my job, and so it's, yeah.
So you found an updated strategy to get that need met. And I would almost challenge you to take it a step deeper. And just because you're already doing the work, and it's, okay, why do I even need to have the drink in my hand? What am I trying to get comfort for? Like, why am I feeling uncomfortable first? That's me needing to then seek out comfort in any form. And you'll see that exists in any limiting beliefs or stories you're still caring about yourself. And so things you're afraid to feel, I don't want to feel excluded again like I did in 5th grade. I don't want to feel, not good enough or not interesting or not included with everybody else drinking. And you'll see there are little tiny thought patterns you run if you could watch your mind in slow motion. Just like you said, right before you go to take that drink or pull up the phone or whatever it is to escape, you first had a passing thought. And any thought that passes on autopilot that you didn't surface to the conscious level and go, oh, what thought was that? Or what was I thinking that made me feel this way? Anything that you don't surface to the conscious level, your subconscious mind emotionally believes as if it's an absolute truth. So if you're like, oh, I'll be excluded, you're living in that moment in a reality where you're the excluded loner guy in the corner unless you have that drink. And so it's just a cool way to start observing and analyze and to recognize that emotions are the effect. Like, we have this horrible thing in society where we think, oh, emotions are bad. Emotions are only ever showing you to yourself. They're literally feedback mechanisms to let you know either you just have been telling yourself a painful story or you have an unmet need. And in both cases, they're there to serve you, alert you, so you can do something about either one.
Yeah, that's really insightful. I love that. So as we've been talking, we've started to transition. I mean, you can see how, I guess, inextricably created relationship or integrated relationship with self is to relationship with others. But as Mike's indicating, or, sort of telling us here with these different stories and sort of explaining his life, so much of what's happening to us sometimes feels social or feels like it's pressure being imposed from outside sources. And so even though, as we've uncovered, maybe it has a little bit more to do with ourselves than it does with others. But I wonder, as we start to talk more about, now interacting with other people and moving on to, shift our conversation from just ourselves as much as we can, anyway, to the relationships that we make with other people. And I wonder if we could talk a little bit about sort of tools that we can use. And especially now, I mean, I hate to kind of beat the Corona drum, but we're definitely going through like a crazy time right now. And, you know, for a lot of people, they're feeling a lot of isolation, a lot of loneliness, a lot of things. Just being left alone in our own heads has been, I think, really difficult for a lot of people. And so I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just sort of, you know, building relationships in general terms, but then also how we maintain them and sort of keep them going during times of crisis or when we're sort of left to our own devices.
100%. So you're raising such an important point. And it's that, you know, we're wired for two things. We're wired for attachment and closeness, and we're also wired for authenticity or independence, right? And so sometimes they can rub up against each other. But right now, because of the world circumstances, we have a basic human need for love and connection. And that's being taken away. And what we said earlier is like anytime you have a need unmet, your brain is constantly going to be eliciting negative emotional responses to try to get your attention so you can pay attention and do something about it. And if we're in a space where that's being taken from us to a large degree, we can't do anything about it. We have to stay quarantined, isolated. We have to start getting really creative with updating our strategies. So one of the first things we have to be able to do is go, okay, we have to acknowledge even those of us who are super independent, even those of us who are, you know, love our alone time and things like that. We have something really basic within us that's being withheld to a certain degree. And so how can we get more love and connection with distance? And what I tell people is it really requires a higher level of vulnerability and a bit of a higher level of effort. And this means, you know, can we make the time? Can we create time to see people on video chat? In our conversations, can we open up and share more about what we're feeling? So much of connection, and this is where most people fail, I would say, not in a negative way, but just it's how we're socialized. So much of connection is getting ourselves actually seen, heard, and understood by other people. We spend a lot of time thinking, oh, we have to be the funny person, the cool person, the whatever. And we don't say to people, hey, you know, what I value in a friendship is X, Y, and Z. What I value in a working relationship, what I'm looking for in a business partner is X, Y, and Z. And we don't share ourselves with people. We try to fit into the boxes we think they've made for us instead. And you can guarantee that you're never going to reach the highest potential of fulfilling your relationships when you're trying to fit into a box that you think somebody else has made for you. And so we can become more vulnerable and we can get our needs met for connection more deeply, even with distance, by starting to communicate what we care about, what we want from people, what we need, share our vulnerability, share our fears, and open up that way so we can get seen, heard, and understood, which is missing from pretty much most people's childhood because we go through classical conditioning and we have to fit into that box. And we can take ourselves out of that and stop putting those expectations on ourselves and instead start sharing ourselves. We immediately create the breeding grounds for deeper relationships and bonds to occur.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Really helpful. You know, one of the things I've been sort of tinkering with, or this metaphor I've been using for relationships now during COVID, is this idea of sort of filling a glass of water for purposes of being satiated, right? And so I think of, you know, especially with like the remote work advocacy I do, you know, I think of sort of like, you know, a text is maybe like a drop of water, right? I mean, it's a way of connecting with people, but it's a really small way. You know, maybe an email is, I don't know, half a cup or a quarter cup or something like this, right? So it fills the cup a little bit more. We're getting closer to being satiated. But if all we got was a quarter cup of water, we wouldn't be very satiated over the, you know, long haul. So, and then, you know, this further ratchets up to, you know, like a video call, for example. And maybe I'm a bit of a purist, but for me, you know, a Zoom call or something like that, maybe it's 90%, maybe it's 95% of a glass of water, right? I mean, we're pretty darn satiated. We can do a lot with video. But for me, I don't think you can really become fully satiated without sort of this interpersonal, real life, in, you know, eye contact, touch kind of relationship, right? And so especially for remote workers, it's really common for us to wind up feeling isolated or alone or things like this, because in my mind, using this as a metaphor, we have a hard time ever truly becoming satiated if you spend your whole time working apart. And so we have started to, I guess, you know, to use your vernacular, develop strategies and things, you know, like don't rely on our work for our social life, you know, let's go meet somebody for coffee after work or something to get that little human connection or, you know, whatever it is. But I wondered if you had just some strategies like that or different ways that we can, you know, become more related or more connected to people throughout these times.
Yeah, so I love your metaphors. I actually have a really similar metaphor I teach in our personality needs course inside of the school. And I say your needs are like buckets, and we can go indirect or we can go direct. We can open the bucket by things like texts and get the little droplets, but you're not going to feel fulfilled. Or you can really open it by trying to find those face-to-face interactions, things like that. So I love that you use that. You're amazing. So here's what I tell people. People have different ways of what makes them feel connected, and different things that make them feel safe and open. Some people, they prefer social connection. So some people prefer lots of short conversations that are fun and light with many different people and variety included in there. Some people prefer that deep emotional connection. And so what I tell people is, like, if you're looking to fill these buckets, right, is to sit down with a cup, to sit down and write the 10 or 15 times you can think of that you felt most connected in your life to other people. Was it with your old friend in this really deep conversation? Was it with your ex or your current partner when you were, doing this thing or that thing? And what you'll see is that there are patterns through which you feel the most connection. And if you can get clear about those patterns, then you know that those are specifically the needs that I have to seek out relative to connection. And then you can come up with these really creative and fulfilling strategies because you know what's going to give you the droplets versus what's going to actually open the faucet. So you're really hitting the nail on the head there. And then I think too, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but there's something called the 5 love languages by Dr. Gary Chapman. And he talks about how we all have different ways we give and receive love, and people speak different languages. And so the 5 love languages are acts of service. So doing things for people, cooking them something, driving them to the airport, bringing your wife coffee in the morning, whatever it is. Physical touch, right? Self-explanatory. Gifts, self-explanatory. Then we have words of affirmation and quality time. And one of the biggest things I've seen just in terms of interpersonal relationships, friendships, especially romantic relationships, is that when people speak different love languages, they don't realize that somebody is trying to give love to them. And so let's say, for example, that, there's Bob and Sally, and let's say Bob is acts of service and Sally's like physical touch and quality time. He could be doing things for her, cooking for her, all these things to try to express his love, and they could just be not even acknowledged or received, and not because she's trying to be difficult, but because she's not registering them through her language. And this man, Dr. Gary Chapman, he talks about how literally it's compared to people speaking 2 different languages, and how there's this huge barrier to connection and communication. So I think it can help us to recognize these 2 major things, which are we have patterns we receive love through. They fall into 2 categories. We give and receive love through our own needs. So like I have a huge personal growth need. Forever until I knew this, I was like buying everybody personal growth books and tickets to seminars, like pushing them on people probably. And I remember being offended, like, oh, nobody's reading the books, nobody's going to the seminars. But it's because I'm loving through a language that isn't being received. Somebody doesn't have the same need set, right? And so we love through our own needs and we project them onto others. And then we love through the 5 love languages. And if we can get clear about those things, we can maximize the way we give and receive love and feel like that basic human need is met.
Yeah. So I wanted to just, this is a little bit of a shift, but we're starting to run out of time. So I'd like to spend a little time talking about that. So in relationships, as we described earlier, we're often playing to our own negativities or things like that. The abused person or abused child gets into an abusive relationship. The alcoholic's daughter becomes the alcoholic, that kind of thing. And, because of, for the reasons we've discussed earlier. But as we grow too, I wonder about, we need to start developing relationships with people who move us forward or help us grow and who are maybe contrary to some of these negative traits. And I think we've talked about enough this idea of, changing our strategies or looking for ways to get around that. But then I think there's this aspect of it, and I thought it was really interesting. I found it on your website. It was this idea of attachment style and the way that we get attached to people and codependency and all this kind of stuff, taking great relationships and maybe taking them too far. And so I wonder if just as a, topic to sort of wind down the show a little bit, if we could sort of talk about this other end of relationships, if we're looking at it from a spectrum, from self to with others to now maybe we've gone too far. Can we talk a little bit about codependency and attachment? And I actually did your attachment style quiz that's free on the website. And I'm happy to share my results, and we can kind of go through what those mean and that kind of thing.
Yeah, tell me your results, please.
Sure.
If you're okay to be the test subject, we'll go through and do an example.
Yeah, no, I thought that this was really cool. And I think, so much of what we've even been discussing today is about pattern recognition and all this stuff is so much about being able to look at ourselves and be sort of critical of ourselves so that we can self-assess, so we can understand the problem. So I think this is really interesting, and that's why I'm willing to share it. Is I think I think it could be valuable for people. So the little 4-part thing that I was given, or the results of my quiz, were that I am made up of these 4 characteristics. I'm secure, dismissive avoidant, anxious preoccupied, and fearful avoidant. What's interesting is that I'm 31% secure, so that was my number 1, and then I'm equal parts 23, 23, and 23 of the other 3. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting result. But I wonder if you talk a little bit about these different attachment styles, what, if anything, that means to you based on my results. And then and how people might be able to use this to sort of assess their own situation.
100%. So you can think of our attachment styles as the rules that we play by in terms of how we know how to subconsciously relate to other people. And I like to compare people with different attachment styles as like 2 people, let's say in a relationship, playing a board game with a different set of rules. Like obviously there's going to be friction and challenges and things that come up. And so there are 4 different attachment styles. The first one is secure. And usually that means you had a fairly stable childhood. Your needs were met fairly consistently. There was enough emotional interconnectedness between you and your caregivers. You felt like you could trust other people. That's what we're all aiming for. So it's wonderful that that was your dominant style. And the other 3 are all insecure. And the anxious, so secure people essentially too, like those will be your relationships that are more likely to last. People will have healthier relationships, healthier ways of communicating, all this like good stuff happens there. That's what we're all striving for. And then there's insecure attachment styles, which make up, unfortunately, the majority of the population nowadays. And so there's the anxious preoccupied, and this is the person that you might see in their adult lives exhibiting traits where they feel needy or clingy, or they can be too much, or if somebody doesn't answer, they call back 5-10 times. And they really fear being alone. Maybe they go from relationship to relationship. This is where we see people the most who exhibit codependent patterns. They feel like love equals enmeshment. We both forego our needs and we only meet each other's. And that's a really unhealthy way of relating, because we need healthy interdependency. We need not dependency, but interdependency. And sometimes the anxious preoccupied is also called the love addict. Then we have our opposite end of the spectrum, the dismissive avoidant. And this is the person that usually had emotional neglect in childhood. And so they just learn, well, I just need to self-soothe and take care of myself because my caregivers aren't meeting my needs. And so let me just... Is that you? I guessed that just so you know. Earlier I was like, you're the dismissive avoidant. Yeah. But there's some really beautiful qualities about the dismissive avoidant. They become really independent. They can be really good at taking care of themselves and looking out for themselves. But sometimes too, I have to acknowledge you, because the fact that you're reading Jim Quick and doing emotional work on unpacking things, that's actually something most dismissive avoidants don't do. So that usually means you're on the path to becoming more secure and you're showing up for yourself. Dismissive avoidants often fear commitment. They'll get, open and interested in relationships, but as soon as there's a seriousness or a lot of vulnerability required, sometimes you'll self-sabotage. And really that means you'll push people away and you'll feel like you're losing interest, but sometimes they're just deactivating strategies, basically these subconscious strategies to keep you safe. Because if in childhood, you were we're all wired for connection and attunement. And if you were reaching out to your caregivers and they weren't able to emotionally bond with you the way you needed, then all you learn as a kid is oh, well, it must be something's wrong with me. The mind is too young to go, oh, my caregivers are emotionally unavailable. And instead it goes, oh, there must be something wrong with me. All right, well, trying to be open and vulnerable just feels bad and gets me rejected. So there's no point. And then you become hyper independent as a result. And when you're brought back to that place where you might have to be vulnerable to progress the relationship, let's say from the honeymoon phase into the next phases of the relationship, often there's this pushback or need to protect yourself, and it's all happening subconsciously. Your conscious mind is oh no, I'm bored. Your subconscious is no, we're running because we feel unsafe. So that's the other end of the spectrum. And the really interesting part is that the anxious and dismissives often come together and attract each other in relationships. Most people in a relationship, unless they're too secure, often have a different attachment style. And so you obviously trigger the crap out of each other, right? And because the anxious wants that connection, wants the closeness, the dismissive wants the space, but it's actually the subconscious comfort zone because you're in an anxious relationship to yourself, always worried about, what's going on here? Do I have enough space? Am I having time to self-soothe? And so your subconscious is actually attracted to somebody who treats you the same way that you treat yourself, right? And vice versa. The anxious person who's codependent, like Rand was mentioning, is often the person who is in a dismissive relationship to themselves. They're dismissing their own feelings, dismissing their own needs, trying to fit into others' expectations and see what people need from them. And so they're in this constant state of disconnecting from themselves, which means, I'm so attracted to somebody who treats me the same way I treat myself. It fulfills my subconscious comfort zone. And the last major attachment style is your fearful avoidant. And this is most characterized by trauma. This is a person who usually felt really unsafe in childhood, and they have distrust wounds and betrayal wounds, and it's the hardest attachment style to often reprogram, but it's all reprogrammable. I was fearful avoidant myself, so I promise it's reprogrammable. And you kind of get both ends of the spectrum. You get this like need for closeness and fear of the abandonment, similar to the anxious preoccupied, but then when people do get too close, it's like, oh, no, I need my space. So it's sort of the like, come here. And then somebody gets close, and you're like, no, go away. And this is the hot and cold person you see in relationships. And so we all have parts. We all have, it's a spectrum, and we can all have different components of different attachment styles, but it is, I would say, the number one predictor of our overall success in our relationships romantically, and in our friendships, our family relationships, and our colleague relationships. It spills all right into there as well.
Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for all that explanation. I think we're starting to get down to the end here. I think the only other thing I wanted to try and touch on quickly, and we've spent so much time talking about it, I honestly don't know if there's a quick answer to it or not, but is this idea of pattern recognition. So we've been talking the whole time about these patterns. They exist, all this kind of stuff. And that these patterns are going on. However, as we've uncovered, it's widely not noticed. Most of us don't see these patterns. I wondered if you could talk a little bit, just quickly here in the last few minutes, if there are some skills that we could start to develop that will allow us to be better about recognizing these patterns. I understand so much of it's probably intention and things like that, but I wonder if you could maybe, just give us a couple little fine points on pattern recognition. It just seems like for many of us, like this self-introspection is really hard. It's easy for us to judge other people, but for some reason, like looking internally and trying to be able to, like, I guess, overcome our ego is really difficult. And so I wonder if you could just talk a little bit, if there are any pointers, in and around this pattern recognition, outside of just stop looking for an easy answer and just do the work.
Yeah, I love that. So one of the first things I tell people is, it sounds really intense, but we all go through trauma. And trauma is either all the things that happen that shouldn't have happened. So somebody hit you or screamed at you or whatever it is. But it can also be all the things that didn't happen that should have happened. So, you didn't get that emotional attunement and connection, and that's necessary to keep growing and developing that area of yourself. And so, we all have trauma, and basically the way we're conditioned and socialized as human beings is traumatic. And one of the first byproducts of that trauma is that we learn to disconnect from our own feelings and needs in real time throughout the day. And we don't realize, like, how many times have you guys had a conversation with somebody and maybe you feel like violated, like a boundary was violated, and maybe you didn't realize it until 2 hours later when you got home and you're eating dinner and you're like, that actually didn't feel so good. And a part of what that is a symptom of is that we're not really aware of what we need and what we feel in real time. And so it's hard when we make decisions to be fully taking ourselves into consideration when we don't know what that's made up of, when we don't know what to consider within ourselves. And so a really easy, just first part to start off with is do feelings and needs journaling work. Go through your day. You can do it in a journal. You can do it friggin' as you're driving home from school or from work. You just think to yourself, okay, how was my day? And what did I feel throughout the day? And if I felt bad, what did I need to happen instead? And what you're doing is you're getting into this relationship, which we've all disjointed from, that says, oh yeah, my emotions are feedback. They're my guides. They're telling me when something is out of alignment. And so if you can recondition the relationship you have to your own emotions to see, oh, I feel bad. Okay, hold on. What's going on inside of me? What need is not being met? Or what need was violated? Or, what painful thoughts am I thinking? What painful stories am I telling? If you can just do that one thing, you're going to see that entire landscape of your internal subconscious reality change, because then you'll be empowered. Like, oh, I feel bad. Oh, I need to go get this need met. oh, I feel bad. Oh, I'm telling myself that I'm stupid because I made that mistake at work and I'm running this story. And if you can start changing that at the conscious level, now you can't feel like the victim of your emotions. And now you're going to start recognizing the patterns of your needs and the stories you tell yourself. And what you'll see is that that's all, that entire construct is just a set of patterns based on old unresolved traumas that your subconscious is just replaying like old tapes all throughout the day on autopilot.
Well, cool. Well, I don't think we could have done much better. That was a great hour, and we covered, I think, a lot of ground. So thank you so much for all that. Thais, where can people find out more about you and the work you're doing online, on the socials, wherever? Where are you best found, and how can people get in touch?
Awesome. So most of I put a ton of free content out on YouTube. So it's Personal Development School Thais Gibson. And then our website is www.personaldevelopmentschool.com. And like you said, there's an attachment style quiz on there for people who are interested in their relationship style. And then we have personal development _ school on Instagram. And it's the Personal Development School itself that has all the different courses and webinars and everything in there.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Thais. This has been great. I really appreciate the conversation. And Mike, anything else?
No, just thanks for giving us your time. Really appreciate it. And go check out our website and watch her YouTube videos. Like she said, there's tons of content there. So just find her on YouTube.
Awesome. Well, thanks to everybody
thank you
for
so much. Thank you for having me. This was lots of fun, and you guys are wonderful interviewers.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And thanks to everybody who tuned in this week and every week. And we'll see you all next time.